Anyone can learn to do stained glass. All you need are some tools, supplies, and someone to show you how. That's where I come in. I'm Stellathena of Athena Stained Glass. I've been doing stained glass using the Tiffany technique for almost 25 years. I have a degree in education and have 32 years teaching experience. Let me be your stained glass guru. Come on, let me show you how. This project is sponsored in part by the National Endowment for the Arts and a grant from the Tamarack Foundation for the Arts. If you would like to learn more about how the National Endowment for the Arts grants impact individuals and communities, visit www.arts.gov. Today I'm going to show you how to make this 3-mirror kaleidoscope with an image wheel. Now this image wheel was made with acrylic. I'm going to show you how to make one with stained glass. The first thing I need to show you is how to make a tool that you're going to need. And for that we will need a single blade disposable razor, an Exacto knife, and some tape. So for this we're going to go down in front of the blade and detach these little rivets that hold it on. Very carefully remove the blade. And then we're just going to break off the top. We just need a little bit of it exposed too. Use just a masking tape. And tape that back onto the handle. Now I'm going to put this aside and I'll show you how to use this later. So keep that handy. For this project you're going to need a Morton cutting board. This is a manufactured cutting board, and I'm not a spokesperson for Morton Glassworks, but I'm sold on this product. I use it all the time. I've used it for years. I've had this for probably 20 years. It is a plastic waffle board. It has a straight edge at the bottom with measurement increments, and I've made some modifications. And one modification that I've made is I've put this thin glass onto the board, because when you are cutting front surface mirror, you can't have it laying on a surface like this that, when you run your cutter over it, it's going to make bends in your glass because it's a very fragile, very thin glass that we're working with. So you need something to reinforce it, make it have a nice, smooth, solid surface underneath. So that's one modification I've made. And it's best to use a thin glass so that when you put it up against the straight edge, that it slaps up against it and not over top of it. Another modification is when you get the Morton cutting board, it comes with an aluminum straight edge, and this is made of soft material. It's aluminum, so it's going to be a different metal than your cutter metal on the head. So when you run it across it, it's going to jump. It's going to grab hold of this and jump and make little irregularities in your cuts. So what this metal does, it's hard. It's an oil hardened metal, and it's the same metal as used in your cutter, so that it's not going to cut into it and make any irregularities in your glass. It's going to make a smooth cut. This has been set up so that our board is very square. You have to make sure. Let me go over some of the tools besides your cutting board that you're going to need. You're going to need a square. And we're going to use a Dremel tool briefly in this lesson, and it has to have a cutting wheel on it that we could use to cut metal. This is only if you're using a screw that isn't meant for a kaleidoscope. You can buy these little axles to use with the kaleidoscopes. However, I'll show you an alternative if you can't find those, or if you can't afford those. I'll show you how to do that. That's what this Dremel tool is for. Otherwise, you will need the standard tools. You'll need your permanent markers, a black and a silver. You'll need your glass cutter. preferably with a new head and wheel before you put any oil in it. I'm going to show you how to cut the surface mirror first, and I'll do that before I put oil in it. You'll need grousing pliers. You'll need your soldering iron and stand. You'll also need your grinder with a medium grinder bit. Another thing that we're going to need to make is a little cleaning tool. And for that you'll need some, believe it or not, some toilet paper. Now, you have to choose toilet paper that is very soft, but doesn't have any perfume or print on it, because the perfume and the perfume and the ink that they have in other toilet papers leave a residue. They have oil in it. You will just wrap a straight piece of glass in this toilet paper, and I'll show you why we would need that later. So we can set that aside as well. And you'll also need some paint thinner that is made for wood. It has a very high flash and has no oil in it. And we'll talk to you about that later. As far as supplies go, you're going to need some mirror. This is not front surface mirror. This is regular looking glass mirror, and the difference in the two is the regular looking glass mirror has a reflective surface on the back of your glass that reflects through the glass. If you put an object up to the regular looking glass mirror, there's a gap between the object and the mirror. That's not true with front surface mirror. With front surface mirror, the surface or the reflective surface is on the front of the glass rather than the back of the glass, so that when you touch an object to the mirror, the reflection and the object have no gap. That's the difference. It's extremely easily scratched. This is actually the back of the front surface mirror that is highly reflective also, but the front of the mirror is covered with this cellophane to protect it until the last moment when it's ready to be used. So we're going to put this away in a safe place. Another supply that you will need is your opaque glass. You want the body of the kaleidoscope to be very opaque. You don't want to see into that prism. You don't want to be able to look through it because it's not necessarily aesthetic. You'll also need a clear piece of scrap glass from a broken window or whatever. You just need a couple of small pieces of this. You'll also need your copper foil. This is 7/32. It's just a copper back. Because we're using opaque glass, it doesn't matter what the back of the glass, what color the backing of this is. And we'll also need like an 1/8 inch black back foil for the eyepiece. And of course you'll need flux and solder. I like to use the liquid flux for the eyepiece. You can use it for the whole project. And you may also want to use a patina, and the patinas come in a black and a copper. You'll also need some automotive sandpaper, like a 600 grit and a 400 grit. And I also use a piece of glass, or you can also use granite or something that's extremely smooth. And I just place that, and it's called wettable or waterproof sandpaper. So you'll need to just tape that at the top so that this gives a little bit. You don't want it to get wrinkles in it. And I mount that on a piece of foam or something sturdy, and I'll show you how to use this later. So let's get started. So when you are making a kaleidoscope, you have to consider how long it needs to be. And if you take something with print on it and you hold it up to your nose and then pull it out to the point where you can read the print on it, that's usually about 8 inches from your nose. So it's best to have a kaleidoscope that's about 8 to 8.5 inches long, because that's where your eyes can focus on the image at the end of the wheel. So I like to make mine about 8 inches long, and I make mine 1 inch wide. And here's the problem one of the problems with front surface mirror. If you've had any experience at all cutting glass, you know that when you cut a straight line, right at the end of that break, your glass shears either to the left or to the right. And there's some scientific explanation for that. I don't know what it is, but I know how to remedy it. Starting out with a nice straight edge at the bottom. So I cut off about 1/4 inch. I measure 8 inches, and I'm going to cut off about another 1/4 inch and then measure 8 inches. And that way we'll be cutting off that shear and we'll have a more perfect piece of glass. So using the straight edge at the bottom, I'm measuring over to the 1 inch mark because I want my mirrors to be 1 inch wide. Now when I'm using my cutting tool, I want to hold that straight up and down and press it against this metal bar and have a smooth and steady cut. Then I'm going to move over. I can see where I have made that score, and I'm moving the score line right up to the 1 inch increment, and I'm going to repeat that. Now we're just doing a 3-mirror kaleidoscope. However, I'm in the production of doing stained glass, and I like to try to do several mirrors at once. So that's what I'm doing, and this is how you would do it if you wanted to produce more than one kaleidoscope at a time. Now I'm going to gently turn this around and put it back in. You'll note where I have marked my glass on the end. I'm going to line it up, and then I'm going to cut across that. This gets rid of that shear at the end. And then again. Now I'm going to turn this up on its edge, and there's my score line. That is to remove the shear. So I'm going to fold it back on itself like this, and using the little razor tool that we made, I'm going to very carefully, without cutting myself, this is very sharp on both sides, I'm going to remove that waste. we're going to, oh, this is the waist piece. It's not the same size as the others. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. And then you do the same thing to each of the scores. And they break really easily. This is very fragile. It's an extremely fragile glass. It reminds me of eggshell. And it's so easily scratched. The front surface, that reflective surface, is on the surface of the glass. And I can just run my finger across it and scratch it, so you have to be very careful. This is the back side of your surface mirror. The front side is covered with this cellophane still. I'm going to use the sharpest edge of my razor and just make a little, just cut away that cellophane just a little. That's what this is for. And it's going to remove just like a hair, just exposing that mirror just a little. Now you're going to need your sandpaper, and this is a wettable sandpaper, and I just use a spritzer, just get it a little bit wet to keep the friction down. Then where that is exposed, I'm going to just give it a couple swipes, and I'm swiping it in different directions so that in case there's an irregularity, if I do it over and over in the same place, it's going to make a groove, and I don't want that. So I'm going to chamfer that off, and then on the 400, I'm just going to lap the corners, and I'm going to do that for each one. So now that I've had those chamfered and lapped, I'm going to need framer square, and I'll also need some masking tape. Then place this on its edge right up to the piece beside it so that there's a little gap. And of course, the side with the cellophane needs to be up, and your hands need to be quite clean at this point, and you need to peel back the cellophane. If you pull straight back, you won't pull them off the tape. There we go. So you can see where it has a little bit of dust on there and it needs to be removed. So I'm going to use a little of the paint thinner onto the little tool that we made with the tissue paper. Just put a little bit along the edge Run it along the mirror very delicately because it will scratch. Then we're going to fold it. Fold it over on itself so that and continue wrapping that around. Now you don't want light to seep in around the mirror, and you want to make sure there's a good contact. So we're going to continue wrapping this with tape. And don't get anything beyond the edge here. We want to set it back just a little bit so our tape doesn't show, but it needs to have a tight fit so that there's no gaps in the mirror. And put that on the seams where they go together so that no light will penetrate any little gaps we may have left. And immediately cover the ends so that no dust will get in there. And then we can set that aside until we're ready. As soon as you peel that cellophane off the front, it begins to collect dust because of the static. So you want to avoid any dust. Okay, now for the rest of the kaleidoscope. In order to make the body of your kaleidoscope, we need opaque glass. And I've chosen this beautiful iridescent purple. And the kaleidoscope will need to be, the body of the kaleidoscope needs to be a little bit bigger than the surface mirror that we cut to allow enough room for everything to fit inside. So I cut it to about 1.5 inch. And again, this Morton board comes in great for cutting straight lines. And it's important that the body of our kaleidoscope is very straight. So we'll need 3 pieces that's cut about 8.5 by 1.5 inches. So you have to begin, when you're using a Morton cutting board, you have to begin with a straight edge. I'll line it up to 1.5 inches. And those of you who have learned to do stained glass, I don't want to bore you, so you can fast forward through this part if you want. In case you haven't, I'll go through what you need to do. So I've made a score. So you'll need 3 pieces that are about 8.5 inches. So now we have our 3 pieces cut to 8.5 inches long. And you need to grind these all the way around so that these little edges that stick out are all ground smooth so that they will butt up against one another. Remember to fill your reservoir with distilled water. So I'm looking to see if there's any little bumps sticking out. Looks pretty good. So this glass that I chose has an iridescent finish on it. That's what I want showing on the outside of my project. So I'm going to put it down when I'm doing my project. I'm looking to make sure that it's very square. You can probably go ahead and plug in your soldering iron at this point. For those of you who are comfortable with your foiling, you can fast forward through this part. But if you need a refresher course or would like to continue, then by all means, join me. Grab your 7/32, 1.25 mil copper foil and your very dry, dust oil-free glass. And I like to start by putting the edge of the corner onto the tape and then rotating the glass and placing it onto the tape rather than the tape onto the foil, onto the glass. So I find that to be easier and most efficient. Just kind of sight down the glass. Place it as evenly as possible. Continue wrapping until you have placed foil all the way around. Grabbing your burnishing tool. Give it a good burnishing all the way around. And then remember to push in and don't slide your fingers down. You will get a nasty cut. And do that for each of your pieces. And place them face down onto your framing square. Excuse my hands. Stained glass is very hard on your hands. It's helpful to have some masking tape or electrical tape when putting these together, just to give you a little bit of extra help in holding them. We want to have them very square. I'm going to fold them onto themselves so that it meets at a V. We don't want them to lap over like we did with the surface mirror. We want this glass to meet at a V. And we're going to fill that little V shape with solder. Need to flux just little points at the end just so we can tack it in place. I just use 60-40 solder. We just want enough to tack it in place. It's always best to get your glove on when you're working with 3D projects. So now we're going to flux wherever we see copper. I don't have any fancy tools. I've had these tools forever. They last a long time if you take care of them. It's an investment to begin with, but like I say, they'll last a long time. And before you go out and buy a whole new set of something, make sure it's something that you want to do. And look in the trades and see if you can find some used equipment before you make a large investment and then decide that you don't want to do stained glass. Let that set a little bit, and you can tell when it's cooled because the luster will change from a shiny to a semi-shiny, kind of a duller hue or duller sheen. Go ahead and tin. I wanted to do stained glass from the time I was in high school. I didn't have anyone to teach me. My art teacher was a great art teacher, but he didn't know how to do stained glass and didn't know anybody who did. And back in that time, back when I was a kid, we didn't have YouTube. I couldn't, go on YouTube and find all the information I needed like you can today. Wish I had. But it took me years to find a teacher. I had finally given up and just bought a bunch of tools. I didn't know what exactly I needed, but I found a kit and I bought a kit. And started teaching myself as much as I could. I soon hit a wall. I was making some 3D projects, but there was a lot I knew I needed to learn. But I kept practicing until one day co-op opened in my area and I was given the opportunity to work with a stained glass artist. I had to travel some distance to do so, but I was grateful and certainly willing to do that. She was instrumental in teaching me to solder, and actually took my hand in hers and said, "This is what it feels like to make a good solder bead." After I struggled, she was able to teach me, and I'm very appreciative and grateful to her. She also taught me how to work within a frame to make sure all my pieces fit, to do an actual stained glass window. And that was helpful in teaching me to work with patterns. Prior to that, I was doing mostly geometric designs. Now notice I did 2 sides of this. The third side is left open, and the reason we leave it open is because we have to insert this axle, and we're going to leave it until we're ready to put the image wheel on. I'm going to estimate that that's going to fit approximately here, so I can go ahead and fill that much of that crevice with some solder. But I'm not going to solder that on yet. my teacher taught me that a good solder bead has a nice roundness to it. It's not irregular. It's not flat in places and lumpy in places. It needs to be very flat when it needs to be, and then very curved most of the time. Like there's times when you need a flat solder. Like, for example, on the area where the eyepiece goes, it needs to be very flat. So I'm holding my iron flat and using very little solder. But when I'm wanting a good rounded solder bead, I hold my soldering iron more vertically and use a steady hand and plenty of solder. So now that we have this all soldered together, I'm going to go back and just put some, I like to put a few decorative soldering little knots on there. So I start on the ends. Now it's really important that we don't let any solder hang down on the inside. So we have to check to make sure before we put the mirrors in not to let any solder hang down. So if you want to do any decorative soldering, do it before you put your mirror in. So I'm using my pattern that is 1.5 by 1.5 by 1.5 because each of my pieces are 1.5 inches wide. So I want to make the eyepiece that goes on the end. In order to do that, I'll need some clear window glass. Now I'll need to cut 2 pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap that with foil, and I use, since this is much thinner glass also, I just use a smaller, I think this is like an 1/8 inch copper foil. I use a liquid flux for that. It's more water soluble and easier to clean. Your eyepieces have to be very clean. We'll let that cool a little bit. Work on the other one. Now for this one, I'm going to use, this is the one I'm going to look through. So I want it to be a little fancier. The other piece won't show quite so much because it will be behind the image wheel. The eyepiece that you look through will be visible. And I like to use a decorative solder or to build a little fancy eyepiece for it. So this is going to go like this. So I need the scalloped edge to go on this side because you really don't need much area to put your eye up to. Now coming back to the first eyepiece, I want to clean that really well inside and out and get that really clean, and I'm going to set it aside. I want to especially get the inside clean because once you put it on, you can't get in to clean it later. Got that crystal clear. I'm going to put it in this, put it away. Now for the image wheel. There's different ways you can do the image wheel. Like I said before, the ones that I showed you here is made with acrylic or epoxy. I just had a little mold and filled it with different colored beads and different glass, and then attached it. So you can do it that way. I'm going to show you a different way. And my kaleidoscope body is 1.5 inches, so I want an image wheel that is 3 inches. That way, since it's going to be, the axle is going to be here, it's going to be about in the center. You want your image wheel to match the size of your kaleidoscope body. If I got it any bigger, the kaleidoscope image wheel would hit when you laid that down, and you would have to account for that by putting maybe some legs on this or something. So what we need is just this 3 inches. So now that we have our 3-inch circle cut out, we're going to fold it in half. And fold it in half again so that we're lining up those 2 crease marks. Doing a little origami here. Paper folding. Open it up again. Then I'm going to fold it this way so I can line up the crease marks. So what you want is just 1/8 of this. So you're going to cut out now. I like to snip off the tip, just a little bit of it, and then trim the ends, kind of round them off, so you end up with a little petal looking thing. There's the one I made earlier. So now is when you collect your 8 pieces of colorful glass. These are just scraps. And we're going to trace around our pattern for each one of those colors. So we're going to cut those out and grind those to fit. So you have 8 pieces. I like to use the circle that I cut out and place one of the little eyelets that I'm going to use right in the center and put a pin in it. But I'm forever grateful for the instruction that I was able to receive from my stained glass tutor. Her name was Lynn Gundry. Wonderful lady. Wonderful stained glass artist. So now I'm going to wrap each piece with foil like we did the rest of the glass and then solder that together. Now that you have each piece of your image wheel foiled, you just need to add a little flux to the ends there. Careful not to get any solder inside the eyelet. You're just going to tack your image wheel in place. I'm going to put this pin back in the center. I don't want that eyelet to be moving around. Now that you have the image wheel completed, just need to clean that up and put some patina on it if you want and set that aside. This old piece of drywall comes in real handy when working with stained glass. I have a granite piece on top of this, but this drywall is probably the best thing to work on that I found for a Homosoap board, because you can put pins in it if you need to, and it's sturdy enough to work on, and it's nice and flat. So this is great surface to work on. You can use this, it's like 1/8 of an inch little screw, and it's brass. You have to use a solderable material. This is brass. You can also use copper. I don't know if they make copper screws, but they do make brass, and this doesn't have to be threaded all the way, just on the end. And you'll also need 2 little eyelets that fit your screw. And an acorn nut that fits. So what we need to do is get rid of the top of this. You don't need the screw head. Now you could just use this if you didn't want to be able to change your image wheel, but if you wanted to change your image wheel, you could take this nut off. Otherwise, you could put the screw through and just have the screw on the end, and then solder your rod, your screw, onto your kaleidoscope like this. But I want mine to be removable, so I'm going to remove this head. For that, I'll need my goggles and a Dremel tool. The screw gets really hot, so you have to hang on to it either with a glove or a pair of pliers. to estimate the thickness of your image wheel, see how far it needs to stick out. And you're going to put the piece that you cut off, the end that you cut off, on the interior of your project. The machined end of that screw needs to be extended out to put the nut on. I'm going to hold on to this and flux and solder the end of this. I just like to pre-tin it. Now, I'm going to add some flux. I've soldered up to the mark that I made, indicating where it should stick out. And I want to get this on there straight. So I'm just tacking it right now. So I want to make sure this fits well. And I like to disguise that rod a little bit. Put some decorative soldering or beads on it. Checking to see if anything is hanging down on the inside. Okay, now I can remove this. Now, with very clean hands, I may need a bit of tape to help me hold this on. Make sure I get the underneath of that really clean. Just going to put a dab of flux, and just tack that in place. We have to take the mirror that we prepared earlier, take the ends off it, and tape up all the seams. Be careful though not to get the tape beyond the ends, because we don't want anything hanging down and obstructing the image at the end. So we want to tape it all the way around. You don't want anything hanging down in front of it, or it'll make a little blotch on the image. So when we're finished, we're going to put the kaleidoscope all the way in, and it kind of moves around, so we don't want that. What I like to do is use a little bit of bubble wrap. Put a little bubble wrap underneath so that it doesn't move around. You can attach the eyepiece to the end. Before you do, make sure the inside of that glass is really clean. If you're not confident in your ability to solder that quickly, then I recommend just getting some silicone to seal it in place, because you don't want any smoke or flux or anything getting inside. Certainly no solder. But we do need to seal that off. Kind of hold it kind of up and down like this. You'll be less likely to get anything inside. And that's all sealed up. It makes a great handmade gift from you to someone you love. So I'm going to put a little bit of patina on here to kind of finish it off. Makes it look kind of antique. You can clean it up. Make sure our windows and our eyepiece are very clean. Sometimes you'll have to remove this to make sure that eyepiece is nice and pristinely clean. And there you have it. So as you can see, the possibilities are endless. If you can dream it, you can do it. I hope you have enjoyed this lesson. Visit my other videos for my 0 to Hero classes. I'll take you from knowing absolutely nothing, no prerequisite, to building your very own kaleidoscope. So join me again next time. Thank you for watching Athena's Stained Glass, and have a wonderful day. God bless you.